Hello, hello. We are speaking about Scotland again today with Allison, Graeme, and Graeme and Spencer, the co-founders of Vive, Ecosse, Scottish independence blog, and also activists. Yes, activists. Hello, Allison.
Hi, Pilar. Nice to
Uh,
see you.
yeah, and hello, Graeme.
Hello, Pilar.
Well, the first question obviously is because you were participating in the events last night, and I want to know about the atmosphere and your view about the Supreme Court result, etc.
Yeah.
So first of all, Alison, please.
Okay. So I was in Glasgow last night, and it was great. It reminded me very much of the kind of 2014 atmosphere. It was an open mic, so you didn't have to kind of book a slot. They had a good variety of people singing and speaking. I think we need to remind ourselves how to do this because it was very informal, and I think the few people said the PA system wasn't as good as it could have been, but I genuinely think the organizer of the Glasgow event hadn't expected so many people. Glasgow really was packed, and it's a very good visual that you'll have remembered from 2014 in front of the Donald Dewar statue with the steps. It's a natural auditorium right down Buchanan Street, so it's pretty dramatic. It looks good in photos. Lots of people brought their flags and banners. Very mixed. It didn't feel at all party political. It felt grassroots. It felt like people coming out to be seen and to be heard and to be part of something. And that is exactly the atmosphere we have to get back. I know Graeme was in Holyrood. He was in Edinburgh last night. And I think Edinburgh was, because it was obviously at Holyrood, that's kind of where it started from, but it was very much encouraged. If you can't get to Edinburgh, do your own. And people just ran with that. So the result was across the country, there was 15 events that I know about, and I think there was at least 5 across Europe, if not more so, because people were just adding to it as they went. But they were all very different in flavour, which is exactly what you want. That's a demonstration of Scotland is not homogenous. People in Selkirk, theirs looked great. I think they had about 500 people, and they had, the events down in Dumfries, and there was a lot of good conversation and little video vignettes and stuff of that. There was Aberdeen, there was Inverurie, there was things going on in Orkney. I think there was about 50 people gathered in Orkney, which is phenomenal. It's very kind of Lib Dem kind of area. So Glasgow was great, and I think it made people feel they wanted more of that, more just the impromptu, just get together, make it easy for them. It's quite an easy venue to get to, by train, for parking if you're driving. It's in the shops. It's a bit of a buzz about anyway. People walking past go, what's going on here? And we'll stop and listen. That's kind of the atmosphere we need to get back. So it was great. I'll kind of let Graeme tell you about his experience, and then we'll talk about the decision yesterday that kind of kicked it off.
Yeah, so obviously other end of the country. So I think Alison was originally coming to Edinburgh, but then your plans changed and you managed to go to Glasgow. Edinburgh was a bit different because obviously Edinburgh was the Leslie Riddick, the sort of pilot event. It was the one that came first, but it was interesting to see that the Edinburgh event was not the biggest event. The Glasgow one certainly seemed bigger, and it seemed that the spirit of independent campaigning and the spirit of let's get on and do this and let's show force across the whole of Scotland was more important to everybody than necessarily coming to hear one person speak. So, I know the First Minister certainly addressed the crowd in Edinburgh, and the atmosphere was certainly very different to a number of rallies because it was the first time, I think, that every party and none were kind of all at the same event. There was no political party could win out this. It was always going to be about the movement and the response to the Supreme Court, either in the positive or the negative. And I think that what's important we see though is that Scotland is not, there's I'm lucky enough that I live, 2 minutes from Edinburgh. I live in a little place just outside Dunfermline, and it's really easy for me to get to Holyrood. And Holyrood may be the centre of Scottish political capital. However, it is not the whole of Scotland. And it was really exciting to see that it wasn't the biggest event. There were bigger events elsewhere. There were other things happening. And, you know, we're talking about even on the Scottish Islands, they were hosting their own events, which it's important to see the movement re-energizing, regrouping, and having a bigger impact together, rather than there's a specific rally at this place, how many people can we bus there and make it look really busy. That, you know, that looks good for a political party. It doesn't do so well when you're trying to get your nation's independence.
It is curious, as a Galician woman, I know the defragmentation of the movement when you want to work for something, anything, is very dangerous. And I have to say that, for example, my impression from Scotland in 2014 was so vast and beautiful. There was a lot of happiness in the air. It was a lot that people were very motivated. They were all together with different views, etc. And I was concerned about the way that this deterioration started in Scotland with partisan views. How do you see that partisan strategy? Do you think it's dangerous for you? Do you think you need another strategy, a grassroots, a true grassroots campaign?
Yeah, there's two aspects for that for me. So there's the aspect, just putting the partisan divisions or whatever aside for a second, just generally, and this is something I've talked about a lot through the last few years about what the grassroots need to do. They need to remember what is powerful about the grassroots and not kill it. And I think the problem is, and Graeme and I have both been in political parties and stuff, so, you know, there's a formula for political parties, and it's to try and control things and make it quite polished and central message. It's very much message from the top, distributed out to the different routes of it. Grassroots is subsidiarity. It comes upwards. It doesn't devolve downwards. And, you know, I've said a lot that they kind of, at the extreme of the political controlling, you know, I'm not mentioning any particular party, but it's just a kind of raison d'etre of political parties, the kind of autocracy, you know, idea of control that's tightly controlled, and then you know what you need to know when you need to know it. And that's a bit of a lack of trust, which is weird because we're trying to get the voters to trust political parties, yet the political parties don't seem to trust the people, which is a bit odd. But grassroots is an adhocracy, and that's why it works. And if you try and impose structures on top of it, it will kill it. And I think that is one of the kind of big problems. So I think that's almost a bigger problem than the divisions. You're always going to have divisions. You're always, at a grassroots level, you're not going to agree with everybody. In fact, if you did, it would be really strange. But you need to connect with where you do agree and kind of agree to disagree on the other stuff. And I said when I was involved early days with the trying to formalise a kind of, what do we call it, National Yes Network, to kind of connect. The idea at the time, it was very, very light touch. We were almost like the telephone exchange. You know, if you didn't know somebody we could connect to, that was as far as it went. It kind of went a bit different, but anyway. But the idea of that, and I said it many times, if we as a network can't have, you know, Tories for yes and radical socialists for yes on the same network, we've failed. Because it's not our job to impose other views, it's our job to connect the yes network. So that, I think, is something that we need to be very cognizant of, you know, that you're not trying to tell people what to think, but you're trying to show them how to connect and how to think about how we learn from mistakes, we share resources, we share ideas and stuff. And I think we need to make sure we've covered the whole pitch and we're not all running after the ball trying to be the star striker. That's another thing I think is really important, regardless of the political parties. It happens within grassroots as well. So let's take our partisan hats off and our political type hats and start thinking like voters again, that this is our country. What do we want? How do we want to be communicated to?
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting point in there that, you know, you've said adhocracy, and there's obviously a doocracy as well. So those who get on and do it often have more success than those who talk about going out and doing it. And, you know, 2014, to Pilar's point, is it was a bit different. You know, in a political campaign, there's an end goal and it's, oh, my side wins, your side loses. But in 2014, nobody, you know, it doesn't really matter what side you were on. You were either yes or no, but it was for the future of your country, and it was something that genuinely you either believed one way or the other, or you remained to be convinced. And I think that, there was a finality to that in 2014. People put a lot of effort in because they were like, "Wow, this is the attempt. We're only going to do this once." In 2013, 2012, I wasn't exactly, I was like, "Oh, well, it's a question. Do I care? Do I not care?" And then I was sucked in. And then I thought, and then when you start to think about it, you start to think, "Oh, well, actually, we could do much better." And we look at other countries and we think they're doing very well, or these ideas are very good. And then, the odd thing is we came out of 2014. And I think if the UK government had actually come out of 2014 and hadn't, done English votes for English laws on day one of the defeat of the Scottish independence referendum, we could have walked away and tried something else, And I think that if they had looked at certain things, like if they had genuinely created the most devolved parliament in the world and the nearest thing to federalism, and if the vow had come true and everything was devolved, save for maybe foreign affairs and maybe defence, I think there's a good possibility we'd be looking at Scottish independence being back at 10 or 15% in the polls, because I think it would satiate most of the country. However, they didn't. And that leads us on to why we've not gone away. And it takes us to the central point of, we are always seeking in the Yes movement to answer the questions. And we've always tried to say, this is what we would do better. And you've got to do that, because the case always has to be positive. You can't just say, this is rubbish, we want to leave this, but we have no idea what we're going to do. This is what we'd love to do, but we're not sure if it's been costed. The big problem we have is we need to reflect on, well, where is the UK leadership on this? Because if the answer is not independence, we are not accepting this absolute rubbish that you are peddling as a country. And, we've had 3 Tory prime ministers in a couple of months. It's a ridiculous situation that we should say, well, you're not allowing independence. What are you proposing? What is the new proposal for Scotland? Because if there is no one, you have no right, you have no ability to stand in our way. And, the ideas we have.
Let's talk about the Supreme Court sentence, because you wrote, Allison, decisions, but that what? And you were speaking about 3 different outcomes. And obviously the more important is that the Supreme Court say something that many of you already knew, that you are not in a union of equals. You're not part of an equal. You're not. You don't have sovereignty, right? Your sovereignty is in the hands of the.
So we've been told.
Yeah.
Or that's the result of the Supreme Court, no?
It told us a lot.
What do you think about the result of the sentence? Because it's quite curious. I was following the Martin Gittins case, for example, and the outcome was different, no?
Yes. I think the interesting thing in the Keating's case is Martin was told that it was premature. It wasn't a question that could be answered because the Scottish Government hadn't actually moved the bill, so there was nothing to decide on. And then the interesting thing is you then pivot to, well, we've moved the bill, we're now ready to proceed. Could you give a steer on whether or not this is legal? And there comes problem 1. You're having to ask, it's not a foreign government because it is the UK government, it is your government as well, but you're effectively asking your government, are we allowed to express a view? Are we allowed to ask a question? And the idea that there's a question we can ask that ruins 300 years of UK parliamentary sovereignty or somehow is incompatible with the free world is a fantastic place to be. We have now got, the question, should Scotland be an independent country, is now a banned question in Scotland. You cannot ask it at the ballot box. That is an illegal question, which in some ways is the only reason that there's no way they will manage to hold Scottish independence off. Because when you have to ban the question being asked,
Yeah. Allow me this question. Do you have the feeling that the Scottish government has wasted a lot of precious time by mistaking the strategy?
Well before the Supreme Court, though.
Yeah, I think they've been wasting time for years. I don't think we've.
8 years.
I don't think this is new.
No.
But yes, it feels. Although we now have that clarity, so I mean, I mean, I could be quite negative and say they've wasted every year since 2015, where we could have been getting action. But in fairness, the Irish border poll. To hold a border poll in Northern Ireland, you must wait 7 years. So it's kind of already in UK law that 7 years is the acceptable time between referendums on, removing yourself from the UK. So I think we've waited our 7 years. We're entitled. I would say we've followed. The only thing that's written down is the Irish border poll. Allison, you know my rant on this one.
I do, but I mean, interestingly, that's something that we've brought up in Vive Ecosse a few times about the fact in an unwritten constitution, you go for convention and precedent. The only written, reference to political generation that they're all thrown back as is in the Northern Ireland Act 1998, which is actually primary legislation from the UK government. So that is their own legislation. And it's also it's in an international treaty in the Good Friday Agreement, which is what, the Northern Ireland Act came out from. So interestingly, why are we talking about this? And I know Joanna Cherry has talked about this, but why is the Scottish government have never talked about the 7 years? They've never said we will. And actually, looking back even further to the Edinburgh Agreement, if you were really canny, you would actually have put that in, because the Edinburgh Agreement came many years after the Northern Ireland Act. So they could say if they had tied it in there, it would have been rock solid in the same way that it is there, that you've got a 7 year window. And 7 years is actually a reasonable time for people to say, okay, what have you done in that space? But the Scottish government talked about this earlier. The Scottish government have got a double-edged sword with the SNP being in power, that they've got two jobs. They've got two. If they were doing it right, they've got two parallel streams, like keeping things on the track, and also planning the off-road journey, where you're going to go off-road. And I know we've kind of written, or you certainly written about that before, Graeme, about, you need both. You need the strong and stable, but you also need the off-road adventurer, both vehicles. It's not one vehicle. You need a number of vehicles potentially. So that's, for me, really important. Why they've not proactively done a lot more stuff, particularly towards state building and building confidence, because it should just be paperwork by now to get independence. It should be, well, we're so far down the line with what we've done, we can see the visible brick walls of devolution, that, if we want to take it further, we've whetted the appetite for people to go over the wall to the next thing, to knock that wall down and see what's possible. And that's what a lot of the work in the Commonweal is trying to do, is to actually show an aspirational vision, to inspire people, not based on hot air, but based on the reality of what Scotland has as assets, including the human assets in Scotland, and reminding Scotland that you have huge amount of resource and assets that are, precious across the world, yet you're convinced out of the power of those assets, like our energy powerhouse. We're an energy superpower compared to our population. We've talked about this a lot, about the kind of wind potential, the wind power potential. We could really change things and inspire the world, and going completely, like carbon neutral very quickly if we really just put that power into people. We could give free electricity to people in Scotland and still export it if we really tapped into all our potential. But it's how far you're willing to go and how far you're willing to stretch the possibilities there. And I think Scotland's not very good at that. We punch above our weight, but we've got a real self-deprecation streak of we're not good enough. What if it went wrong? And we really need governments that inspire us. And I think that's been very lacking. We've been a very kind of tracking above a very, very low bar at Westminster, just to be above. A limbo dancer couldn't get under the level of the bar down there, particularly of the last 4 years. But it's the Supreme Court decision I think taught us a lot. I think from an analyst point of view, you have to look at what do you know? What have you learned from this? What's fact? What do we now know that's fact, not just assumption? Because the avenue we go down will very much be determining what is our best chance of success. What do we know? Where are we winning in this, and where are we strong and where are we weak? Because the UK are doing that. They're absolutely gaming all this, and they've got some external factors up their sleeve as well. But there's other external factors they don't control, like Wales and particularly Ireland. The situation in Ireland just now, 2025, we have to have a general election by January 25 in the UK. But the Irish DAL have to have an election by February 25. And the way the polls over there are tracking, that could suddenly be a very quick catalyst that the UK are trying to, put their finger. It's like the wee boy with the finger in the dike. There's holes appearing everywhere, cracks everywhere in the UK. How do they fight on so many fronts, particularly from a position of weakness?
That's a really interesting point. You raise an interesting point, especially the Supreme Court when it comes to Ireland as well, because I mean, if we change the analogy slightly, I mean, most people were absolutely appalled when the US Supreme Court decided to roll back on Roe v. Wade, and we suddenly had a situation where women couldn't access abortion, and this was seen. However, the UK and European nations didn't suddenly look to the US and say, well, their Supreme Court have ruled it, therefore it is done. The international community has the ability to look at its own future. We look at, I don't see anybody in the Republic of Ireland particularly bothered by what the UK Supreme Court decides. It looks and it thinks, well, we had an example in Northern Ireland where the Republic of Ireland suddenly started offering health services to people south of the border because they didn't recognise the UK Supreme Court's judgment as competent. And while, I don't want to call the judges incompetent or the justices wrong, because they're interpreting their own legislation, I get the feeling that in the rear view mirror of independence, when Scotland's an independent country, we're going to laugh about, oh, well, the UK Supreme Court said we couldn't be independent. Ha ha. Good for the, you have to look at the international context. And the truth of the matter is, if we can get independence polling up a little bit, if we can get it from the 50-50, where the international community, they're not invested. They're going, oh, it's a stalemate, we'll see how that shakes out. If you've got your 60% of people, if the vast majority of people are in support of independence, people look to that. You've seen it in Europe. Europe alone, Scotland 62% for Remain, and all of a sudden we've got positive noises from the European side. We've got positive noises about if Scotland wants to rejoin, it needs to be quick, it needs to this, it needs to... So the truth is, the Supreme Court is important, but it was always about an advisory referendum that the UK government actually legally could have ignored, and it would have required a political settlement anyway. So even if we had got the referendum, if I'd went our way, we would have still been in the situation. And we've got a blog coming out in this on the Tory plan. The exclusive that we've kind of got from the Tory towers is that the plan, if it hadn't gone their way, was to then say it was a pretend referendum. It was a fake referendum, that their side shouldn't take part in it, in the hope that it made it look ridiculous. For support for independence. So we already know that they were going to throw rubbish at the wall anyway if we had won. So in a way, the Supreme Court was important, but only in its own 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Although the result of it's important.
We're running out of time, and you're busy because you're launching a handbook of the Commonweal. So very quickly, the way forward from here. Just a little thought.
Okay, so just following up just quickly onto that from what Graeme said, the Supreme Court was a legal question that had a legal answer, but what the decision was a political event. It's created an event, a jump-off point, a catalyst. That's the important thing for now. It's what we do with that catalyst, whether the 23rd of November 22 is a footnote in history, or it's really writes its own page for that was the end of the beginning, and things actually changed from there. And that is up to the people. People who are in the independence movement, people who are not yet in the independence movement, people who are not actually minded to independence, but actually have a very strong view of, I didn't know the devolution cage had a locked door and we didn't have access to the key. That's made me feel a bit uncomfortable. And I think that's where Ireland and Wales are coming in thinking, how does this impact us? Really? So we do really need to build from that going forward and make sure that, you know, all the talk of we've been marched up a hill, we've been marched back down. It's like, well, we do have the option of digging our heels in and keep going. And if we have to drag the politicians behind us, so be it. Because once we get to kind of 60%, and I'm not saying any referendum needs to be 50% plus one. You know, that is absolutely it. Any vote, that is a democratic majority. Let's not go there. But I just mean about the popular will. So it looks like the settled will. As Graeme said, Europe looked at Scotland and thought, 62% you voted. That's a settled will. You're European. So people, don't give them clarity. Don't leave them with assumptions. If you want people to help you, make it easy for them. And I think, again, that was what yesterday was about. It was about showing the world that we were serious. Because if we don't look like we're serious, why should people be serious about helping? But nobody's doing this for us. This has to happen with us. And we need to change the way we think about it. We need to change our whole mindset about what empowerment is, and that is what the book launch sorted, Handbook for a Better Scotland. It's about really changing our mindset to one of a much more positive and aspirational view of what we can do, but also the tools to do it. How do we do it? It's easy to say, well, we could do this, could do that, but how would that work in practice? How would democracy work to make sure you can harness the people and they have a voice that actually moves the machine, rather than just being passive consumers of the output?
Agreed.
Okay. Well, I thank you both, Allison, Graeme, Spencer. Thank you very much for this interview. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
It's been a pleasure too.
And I'm hope it's not the last time, because there's a lot of things that will be great to speak about Scotland. And I have to say that from an international point of view, the Scottish case is more important than ever. Today, for example, in the Vast television, they were very, very interested in what happened yesterday in the Supreme Court and the reactions. And the alternative on the plebiscite call from Nicola Sturgeon was very well reported on the Vast television. So, well, we'll be in touch. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pilar. Lovely to speak to you.